District Attorney with us, Mitch Morrissey. Mitch visited us in 2004 during the campaign season. Was successful in that campaign. He has prosecuted more than 6,000 felony and 12,000 misdemeanor cases. Mitch is an expert in DNA testing. He's going to tell us a little bit more about that DNA testing. He's really set an example for the country in a number of different crime prosecutions, and we'll tell you a little bit more about the fact that crime has been down in Denver for the last 2 years running. Speaking of running, he is running for the office again, but since he's unopposed, I want to introduce you to Denver's next district attorney, Mitch Morrissey.
I thought I'd give my talk from down here with the PowerPoint, but I want to thank you all for lunch. I want to thank you for having me. There's a number of friends here in the audience, a couple of my neighbors, so it's certainly an honor for me to be here this afternoon. I have to always tell people, though, when I talk about forensic DNA, I get introduced across the country or somewhere. I'm a forensic DNA expert, and I always have a caveat that I tell people about. I went to Mullen High School, and it's here in Denver, and the last science I took was biology, and I got a D. And, of course, DNA has a lot to do with biology, and there was one reason I got a D. I was a wrestler, and the biology teacher was the wrestling coach, and he wanted to make sure I was eligible to wrestle the next season. So I may not have deserved the D that I got. But what I can tell you about lawyers is that lawyers are usually lawyers because they don't like math and science. So in 1989, when we got our first DNA case in Denver, I was a younger deputy working for Norm Early, and I was asked to handle a very bad home invasion sexual assault where the defendant said he wasn't guilty, and that even though we had a fingerprint at the point of entry, that this new science would prove that he didn't do it. And so I talked to Mr. Early, and Norm allowed me to pay for a very expensive DNA test in that case that proved in fact that the individual did do it. And it was the first time in Colorado that we ever presented DNA in a courtroom. It was one of the first times in the United States that DNA was ever found to be admissible in a courtroom. And it was right on the tails of the first time it was ever used in a criminal case anywhere in the world. So, I kind of picked it up, and then of course, anytime there was a case from then on, when I worked for Mr. Ritter, and no one else wanted to do this stuff, and I was the one they always came back to. And so we started that, and I have to mention that I have a great partner in the work that we do in Denver around DNA, and that partner is the Denver Police Department and the Denver Police Department's Crime Lab. If you ever have an opportunity to take a tour of the Denver Police Crime Lab, it's in a very old facility that hopefully we will be getting our new crime lab soon. But the work that they do there may be the best metropolitan police crime lab in the United States. And some of the things that I talk about, we could not do in the DA's office, but for the support of Chief Jerry Whitman and Greg LaBerge, who is the first civilian to ever run the Denver Police Crime Lab. So they are great partners with us. We have done some things that aren't being done anywhere in the United States, and because of them and because of the hard work of the people that work for me, we've been successful in a lot of ways in Denver using DNA. And most people think about DNA. How many of you are CSI fans? It's not real. We never solve these cases in less than an hour. We always have to talk to jurors about the CSI effect. If you've got too many jurors that want to hear too much forensic evidence that you don't usually have in most of our cases, you've got to be concerned about that. There really is a thing called the CSI effect. The one thing I always talk to jurors about when I try cases, I say, I will be calling people from the Denver Police Crime Lab, but I guarantee you none of them look like the people that work in the crime labs on CSI. But it is an accurate form of identification, and that's the primary use of it. But we do use it for other things. It helps us reconstruct crime scenes. It helps us debunk alibis. It's real helpful in a lot of ways, but the primary purpose for DNA in a criminal case is it helps us identify the perpetrator, and it helps us make sure we have the right guy. And I'm sure that you read all the time about the exonerations that go on across the country involving DNA and the person that's been wrongfully convicted, and that's one of the most important uses for it. And we've been lucky in Denver, and I'll talk a little bit about why that is. But the other reason why DNA is important, and I'm glad to see that Beth is here, and when Beth is in the legislature next year, I'm sure I'll be talking to her. But people that make decisions around policy and DNA and about funding a crime lab or the federal funding that we get, the thing that's important to remember is the crimes we solve with DNA are violent crimes primarily. Crimes like murder, like sexual assault on children. And the crimes we solve with DNA, 90% of the victims of those crimes are women. 90%. And the 10% that are left are kids. Very rarely do we use DNA to solve a crime of a man on a man. Most of the cases that we use this science for, we are catching men that victimize women and children in our communities. And that's why I always remind people when we talk about, is this an important use of our funds? Should we use tax money? Should we get federal grants? That's what I always go back to. These are violent predators that we're taking off the street that victimize our kids and our wives and women and children. So that's one point I always make. These are the sources that we're looking for in a crime scene. One thing that we've been able to do with the Denver police is gotten them very in tune with looking for these kinds of substances in crime scenes. When I give this speech to old detectives and they have that one case they couldn't solve, they kicked themselves, there were those beer bottles that we never collected. This has changed the way the police do their job. It's changed the way my prosecutors do their job. It's changed the way the judges do their job. But these are the primary things that we're looking for. We're looking for anything that is going to have a cell in it that's going to give us DNA. Why is DNA important in a criminal case? Well, you inherit it genetically. You get it from your mother and your father. So we'll have some cases sometimes where that's extremely important. We'll have a sexual assault on a child. We may have an incest case where that's very important, identifying the remains of individuals that have been victim of homicide. Oftentimes, we go back to the parents or we go to the child. We get their DNA profile, and we're able then to identify the remains. We're able to say, yes, in this incest case, this child is related or is the offspring of this father, that type of thing. So in the criminal case, it's extremely important. The other thing that it helps us with is that all of you, unless you have an identical twin, has unique DNA. There's nobody in this room that has the same DNA as someone else or someone on the planet unless you have identical twins. You're an identical twin. The fingerprint guys always say, hey, DNA, yeah, that's important stuff, it's good ID, but have you guys worked that fingerprint thing out, or that identical twin thing out? Because you can sort out identical twins with fingerprints, but you can't with DNA. And so we do have cases where we have suspects that have an identical twin. We have to do conventional investigation to try to see which twin did what, and it's important to know if you're looking at someone if they have an identical twin or not.